All right, today we are diving deep into a really powerful ancient text. It's called The Great Discourse on the Destruction of Craving, and it's basically a story about a huge misunderstanding and the brilliant, crystal-clear correction that followed.
But let's start with a question we've all probably wondered about. Is there some essential part of you, a soul, a spirit, a consciousness, that just keeps going, unchanged, from one life to the next? It feels right, doesn't it? It's a really powerful and, honestly, a very comforting idea. But what if that very intuition, that feeling, is actually the source of the problem?
So, our story kicks off with a monk named Sati. Now, Sati was a student of the Buddha, but he had developed this very specific, and as we're about to see, a very, very problematic idea about how our minds actually work. You see, Sati was absolutely convinced he had it all figured out. He went around telling everyone that it's the exact same consciousness that travels from one life to the next, totally unchanged. And on the surface, it sounds kind of plausible, right? But this is why his fellow monks called it a pernicious view, a paccaya ditthagatam. To them, this wasn't just a small mistake. No, this was a fundamental error that could lead someone completely off the path.
So the other monks, they heard this and immediately tried to set him straight. They were like, Sati, hold on a second. The Buddha has taught us again and again that consciousness isn't a thing that travels. It's a process that arises because of certain conditions. Their main point was simple. Without a condition, there is no arising of consciousness. It's cause and effect. But Sati, he just wouldn't listen. He dug his heels in, totally convinced he was right. So, seeing they were getting nowhere, the monks knew this was serious. They had to take it to the top.
And so, Sati is called to stand before the Buddha. You can imagine the tension. The friendly debate among monks was over. This was now a formal examination of a core teaching right in front of the teacher himself.
And the Buddha's response, well, it was not gentle. It was sharp, direct, and incredibly severe. He calls Sati a Mogapurisa, a foolish man, and then asks him essentially, where in the world did you get the idea that I've ever taught anything like that? This shows you this wasn't just a simple error. It was a complete distortion of the entire teaching.
And faced with that, what could Sati say? Absolutely nothing. The text says he just sat there, completely silent, shoulders slumped, head down, totally mortified and speechless. In that single moment, his entire confident worldview just shattered. So, with Sati's misunderstanding now completely exposed, the Buddha shifts from rebuke to teaching, and he offers one of the most powerful and easy-to-understand analogies for what consciousness really is. First, we gotta get this key term right, viññāṇa, or consciousness. Sati thought of it like a soul, a permanent thing. But the Buddha taught that it's actually a dynamic process. It's the process of knowing, and it only happens when the right conditions are met. Think of it this way. It's not a thing. It's an event, like a flash of lightning, not the cloud it came from. And to make this really concrete, the Buddha uses this brilliant analogy. He says, look, consciousness is just like fire. It gets its name from the specific fuel it depends on to arise. Think about it for a second. Is there such a thing as just fire existing all by itself, with no fuel? Of course not. A fire that burns on wood, we call a wood fire. A fire that burns on grass is a grass fire. If it's burning up a pile of trash, it's a rubbish fire. The fire is completely defined by what it's burning. It is that process of burning. And then the Buddha brings it right back to the mind. He says consciousness works the exact same way. It's not one continuous flame. It's a series of little fires, each one sparked by its own particular fuel. And what's the fuel for consciousness? Well, it's our senses. When your eye connects with a shape or a color, poof, eye consciousness arises. When your ear connects with the sound, boom, ear consciousness. And it's the same for your nose and an odor, your tongue and a taste, your body and a touch, and even your mind when it connects with a thought. Each one is a separate little flash, a distinct fire burning on its specific fuel. There's no single permanent flame running through them all.
So you might be wondering, okay, that's a cool analogy, but why does it matter so much? Well, it matters because understanding consciousness as this conditional process is the absolute key to understanding how suffering begins, through a teaching called dependent origination, or paticcasamuppada.
The Buddha lays out this incredible 12-link chain of cause and effect. It's like a series of dominoes. It all starts with fundamental ignorance. You know, like Sati's mistaken idea. That ignorance leads to our actions, which then sparks that flicker of consciousness. From there, the dominoes keep falling through our senses, our feelings, and then, and this is the critical part, to craving and clinging. These last few links are what fuel the whole cycle of birth, getting old, and dying. It's a complete causal chain reaction.
Okay, so where's the practical part? It all comes down to one crucial moment: how we react to a feeling, what's called Vedana. Look, both a beginner's mind and a trained mind are going to experience pleasant things, unpleasant things, and neutral things. You can't avoid that, but here's the difference. The untrained mind immediately reacts. It craves the good stuff, pushes away the bad stuff, it clings. And that clinging is the fuel that keeps the whole chain of suffering going. The trained mind, on the other hand, simply observes the feeling for what it is, without adding that extra fuel of craving. And right there, in that moment of not clinging, the chain is broken.
And this, right here, is the most hopeful part of the whole teaching. Because if suffering arises from a chain of conditions, that means we can make it stop. All we have to do is break one of the links.
The logic is just so beautifully simple. The Buddha puts it this way: when this is, that is. From the arising of this, that arises. That's the chain reaction moving forward. But the reverse is just as true. When this is not, that is not. From the cessation of this, that ceases. If you remove the cause, you remove the effect. Simple as that.
So we can target one specific crucial link, craving, or tanha. By stopping that one reaction, the whole structure just falls apart. When there's no craving for a feeling, then there's no clinging. Without clinging, there's no fuel for what comes next. Without that, there's no future birth. And if there's no birth, there's no aging and death. The entire fire of suffering just goes out. Not because we stomped on it, but because we simply stopped throwing logs on it.
And that really brings us to the final thought here. The Buddha's fire analogy isn't just some clever explanation for a philosophy class. It's a set of practical instructions for your own mind. It asks us to see our own experience, not just some solid, permanent self, but as this flickering flame, totally dependent on conditions. So the question it leaves every single one of us with is this: if every moment of your experience is a fire, fueled by what you choose to pay attention to and cling to, what happens when you just stop adding the fuel?